The vertical long-run Phillips curve is actually another expression of the classical idea of neutrality of money. The long-run aggregate supply curve and the long-run vertical Phillips curve are actually two sides of the same thing. So this can be shown with the help of a suitable ADAS model. So we start from the part A of the figure. Here the short-run aggregate supply curve is shown as upward rising. The aggregate demand curve is initially given as AD0. The equilibrium is at E0, prices are P0 and output is Y0. Now suppose that because of expansionary monetary policy, the aggregate demand curve shifts from AD0 to AD1. Clearly, prices rises from P0 to P1, output rises from Y0 to Y1. Therefore, employment increases and unemployment falls. So, in the short run, there is a trade-off between inflation and unemployment, and the short run aggregate supply curve may be related to the short run Phillips curve. In the long run, all the prices are perfectly flexible and the workers adjust their expectations instantaneously with change in the prices. The long run aggregate supply curve is vertical at the full employment level of output. So this is shown in the part B of the diagram. So here LRAS is the vertical aggregate supply curve. Initial aggregate demand is AD0, price is P0. Now suppose aggregate demand increases and the curve shifts from AD0 to AD1. The impact on prices is there, but there is no impact on the level of output. So this is essentially the same relationship which is depicted by the long run Phillips curve. In the long run, as the aggregate demand changes because of monetary expansion, prices will rise with no impact on output and employment. So that the vertical long run Phillips curve will derive its shape from the vertical long run aggregate supply curve. So this will be now considered in a bit detail. We start from the equation of the aggregate supply curve, which says that y is equal to yn plus alpha times p minus expected price, or to rewrite it, y minus yn is equal to alpha times p minus ep. So essentially the output gap will be depending on the difference between actual prices and expected prices. If the actual output is greater than the natural rate of output, then actual prices will exceed the expected prices. In an economy that operates beyond full employment, then the prices will be more than the expected prices. Similarly, if the output level is less than the full employment level and there is recession in the economy, then the actual prices would fall short of the expected prices. We can write the price equation as P is equal to expected price plus 1 by alpha times y minus yn. Now we introduce a supply shock parameter V in the system. And then we subtract P minus 1, that is the price in the immediate past period, from the left hand side and right hand side of the equation. Therefore, the equation becomes P minus 1 in the left hand side equal to expected price minus P minus 1 plus 1 by alpha times y minus yn plus V. P minus 1 is nothing but the change in price, which is inflation. EP is the expected price minus yesterday's price, which is nothing but the expected inflation. Y minus yn is the output gap. So it shows the extent to which the actual output is different from the natural rate of output. V is the supply shock parameter. Therefore, this can be rewritten as pi, which is inflation, is equal to pi minus 1, which is the past inflation, plus 1 minus alpha into y minus yn plus v. Expected inflation is past inflation. So basically we have adaptive expectation in this model. We modify the relationship a bit. The Okun's law states that deviation of actual output from the natural rate of output is inversely related to the deviation of actual unemployment from the natural rate of unemployment. So we can write it as 1 by alpha times y minus yn is equal to minus beta times u minus un. So as the u minus un, this gap is greater than 0, y minus yn will be less than 0. So when the actual output is more than the natural rate of output, then actual unemployment will be less than the natural rate of unemployment. Then the inflation equation may be rewritten as pi is equal to pi minus 1, which is expected inflation, minus beta times u minus un plus v. Now this u minus un now gives us the cyclical unemployment and v gives us the supply shock. Apart from the expected inflation, there are two components, the cyclical unemployment and supply shock, which will be giving us the reasons for inflation. The cyclical unemployment component gives us some effect from the demand pull inflation. If the cyclical unemployment falls, then there will be more inflation, and this type of inflation will be called the demand pull inflation. If aggregate demand is higher in the economy, then the producers will be producing more output, they will be demanding more labor, so unemployment will fall below the natural rate of unemployment. The wages will increase and finally the prices will also increase. So this is the demand pull inflation. There is another component in the equation which gives us the supply shock. As there is a supply shock in the economy, that will be directly affecting the cost of production. As the cost of production rises, then that will be passed on to the consumers and accordingly there will be rise in the prices. So in this inflation equation, or which is the equation for the Phillips curve, the inflation in any period t will be determined by the expected inflation and the two other components which will give us the different causes of inflation. The equation for Phillips curve also implies that there is some inflation inertia. In this form of Phillips curve equation, the natural rate of unemployment is often termed as NAIRU, or the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment. So if we assume that the economy is operating at NAIRU and there is no supply shock, then present inflation is determined by past inflation. This is what is meant by inflation persistence or inflation inertia. If there is inflation inertia, then inflation will keep on going without escalation or moderation unless some exogenous factor stops it in its track. So this is clear from the equation. If prices are rising at a rate of 5% now, then given the supply shock and unemployment at NAIRU, in the next period inflation will also rise at a rate of 5%. So this will stop only if some exogenous factors are in place. In presence of inflation inertia, past inflation would affect the expectation about the inflation in the future. Moreover, it will affect the prices and the wages that the individuals will be setting. Inflation inertia may be explained in the AS-AD framework. It is depicted as persistent upward shifts in the aggregate supply and the aggregate demand curves. Suppose that the prices have been rising quickly, then people would expect them to go on rising quickly. So the short-run aggregate supply curve will keep on shifting upward until some exogenous factors such as a recession or a supply shock could change the inflation and the expectations of inflation. Such expectation of inflation will shift the aggregate demand upward. This is often true because the increasing prices may be fueled by a persistent growth in the money supply, and in that case it is quite natural for the aggregate demand curve to shift upward. In this situation, the prices would continue to rise. Now the government intervenes and understanding the graveness of the situation, it decides to stop the money supply growth. In that case, the aggregate demand will stabilize, but the aggregate supply curve will keep on shifting towards left. This shift in aggregate supply curve will cause a recession in the economy. As the recession sets in, unemployment will increase. This will reduce inflation and the expected inflation also. This is how the inflation inertia will finally subside. Now we consider the equation for the Phillips curve in order to draw the short run and the long run Phillips curve. In the short run, Phillips curve is drawn on the basis of given expectation about inflation and the supply shock. So we take pi minus 1 to be given and v to be given also. Therefore, in the short run, there is some trade-off between inflation and unemployment, and beta gives us the extent of the trade-off. In the long run, the people will adjust their expectations of inflation so that the trade-off will be holding only in the short run. The policymakers, as we are discussing continuously, cannot keep the inflation above the expected inflation and thus unemployment below its natural rate for a long period of time. As the expectations adjust, the unemployment returns to its natural rate. U becomes equal to UN, and then pi will be equal to expected pi plus V. So that will be giving us the long run Phillips curve, which is vertical. No trade-off exists between inflation and unemployment. Finally, we can consider the impact of an adverse supply shock on the Phillips curve. We start from the part A of the diagram, where we have the initial AD and AS0 curve with equilibrium at E0. Price level is P0, output is Y0. Accordingly, we have a short-run Phillips curve which is given by PC0. Initially, the economy is operating at a point E0 where unemployment is U0, which is actually associated with the output level Y0. The inflation level is I0. Now suppose there is some adverse supply shock, so that the aggregate supply curve shifts from AS0 to AS1. New equilibrium is attained at point E1, prices rise to P1, output falls to Y1. So now it's a situation where prices rise and output is depressed, so that unemployment also rises. So basically this is a period of inflation and a stagnation, which is also called a stagflation situation. As there is a supply shock, then it is evident from the equation of the Phillips curve that it will be shifting towards right. Each Phillips curve is drawn on the basis of a given supply shock. The Phillips curve will be shifting towards right because after the supply shock at the same level of inflation, the unemployment will increase in the economy. This is because of the fact that after the supply shock, the costs have increased so that the firms will immediately reduce their demand for labor. So here the supply shock shifts the Phillips curve from PC0 to PC1. Now the economy is operating at a point like E1, which is lying to the northeast of the equilibrium point E0. Now at E1, the economy is facing a higher level of unemployment as well as a higher level of inflation. Clearly, this situation is problematic. Now, how to overcome the situation? Since prices are higher, the government might take policies to reduce aggregate demand. Now, as aggregate demand is reduced, then that will further aggravate the unemployment. And if they increase the aggregate demand to fight the unemployment, then that will raise the inflation further. That means the policymakers are now facing a less favorable trade-off between inflation and unemployment than they did before the shift in the aggregate supply. They will either face a higher inflation at the given unemployment, higher unemployment at the given inflation, or at some combination of these two. So here we have shown the third case, but we can have the E1 to be at some other point also. It may be vertically above E0 or it may be just in line with I0 also. We should consider one more point also, that is whether this supply shock is permanent or temporary in nature. If the individual workers, firms believe that this adverse supply shock is purely temporary in nature, then they will adjust their expectations accordingly and the Phillips curve will soon come back to its initial position. That will save the policymakers actually. If, however, the workers and the firms believe that the supply shock is purely permanent in nature, then the Phillips curve will not come back to its initial position. It will remain there in the less favorable situation and the entire scenario will be problematic for the policymakers. Let us now consider the cost of reducing inflation in an economy. So, is it possible for the policymakers to reduce the rate of inflation when it is sufficiently high in the economy? In the diagram, let us assume that the economy is operating at the point S. Unemployment is at its natural rate, but the policymakers consider this inflation rate to be too high. They now want to attain a lower inflation rate and they want to shift the economy to the point R. Now the policymakers cannot directly move from point S to point R on the long run Phillips curve. Starting from point S, as they decide to reduce the rate of inflation, they are taking some contractionary monetary policy. As the contractionary monetary policy is taken, then immediately unemployment will rise in the economy above the natural rate of unemployment. So that in the short run, the economy moves down along the short run Phillips curve SRPC0 from point S to point M. Now at point M, the economy is operating at the unemployment rate U1, which is greater than the natural rate of unemployment U0. However, at point M, the inflation is at the desired level. Now point M is only the short run point, and the economy in the long run will not have to suffer an unemployment rate which is as high as U1. Soon people realize that the government has contracted the money supply, and accordingly there has been a fall in the prices, so that they will now adjust their inflationary expectation downwards. This will lead to a leftward shift in the short-run Phillips curve from SRPC0 to SRPC1. The economy moves from point M to point R. Now it is operating once again at the natural rate of unemployment, but now the inflation has been reduced at the desired level. This shows that through appropriate contractionary monetary policy, the government might reduce the rate of inflation in the long run, but in the short run it will have to suffer a temporary rise in unemployment and the resultant loss in output. Therefore, the disinflation or the reduction in inflation comes with certain cost. This cost may be measured by the sacrifice ratio, which compares the benefit of disinflation with the cost that it imparts. The sacrifice ratio is defined as the money cost of lost production by the percentage change in inflation. The numerator shows the cost associated with disinflation, and the denominator shows the benefit that comes from this policy of disinflation. If the sacrifice ratio is higher, then the cost of disinflation exceeds the benefit of disinflation and the process is costly. There are, however, cases when the sacrifice ratio may be moderate enough so as to help the policymakers and the economy also to reduce the inflation in a less painful way. This is typically the case when the workers and the firms form their expectations not on the basis of adaptive expectations but in the form of a rational expectation. In adaptive expectation models, individuals and firms base their expectations of price increase in future on the past actual inflation rates. The intellectual revolution of 1980s emphasized that people rather form their expectations rationally. A group of economists who discussed the matter included Robert Lucas, Thomas Sargent and Robert Barrow. There was a new approach to economic theory and policy. This is called rational expectations. In the rational expectations theory, we assume that people optimally use all the information that they have, all publicly and privately available information, including information about government policies, while forecasting the future. This school criticized the earlier models of adaptive expectations on the ground that while forming expectation, people usually take into account more available information rather than the simple past inflation rates. This new approach has significant implications for many areas of macroeconomics. The issue of the trade-off between inflation and unemployment gained newer dimension after the introduction of the rational expectations theory. The Friedman and Phelps model, that is based on the adaptive expectation, says that there is a short-run trade-off between inflation and unemployment, and in the long run the trade-off will disappear. Now, how quickly this trade-off disappears will depend on how quickly the expectations adjust. The proponents of the rational expectations theory believe that the monetary and fiscal policies, since they affect the inflation rates, they will be affecting the expected inflation also. Therefore, any change in policy will have significant impact on the individuals' expectations about the future price change. Friedman and Phelps also pointed out that as the monetary policy changes, people will adjust their expectations. But under the rational expectations model, this change in expectation following a policy change will be more instantaneous, or rather more quick. The implication is significant because in that case, inflation may be less inertial than it appears to be. The short-run trade-off is less intense. There is hardly any inherent momentum in the present process of inflation. Let us consider some example in the rational expectation model. Suppose that the government takes up or announces policies to reduce unemployment and eventually to increase inflation. This information is now available to the public, and they will be using this piece of information while making their expectations about the future price increase. Firms and workers assume that this commitment is credible. That is, they believe in the announcement and adjust their inflationary expectations quickly. In the rational expectation model, thus, the expected rate of inflation increases precisely because of the fact that the government's current and prospective monetary and fiscal policies warrant those expectations. So, inflation will quickly rise without any fall in unemployment or the rise in output. Thus, in the rational expectation model, inflation can be stopped much more quickly than advocates of the momentum view have indicated. Therefore, the cost of disinflation will be lower than what is estimated. To Sargent, the sacrifice ratio could be much smaller than what is suggested by the previous estimates and the studies on Phillips curve relationship. Indeed, in some of the most extreme cases, it could be also zero. Let us now explain how the process goes. Suppose that the government announces to take up a policy to reduce inflation, and this commitment seems credible to workers and firms. This credibility of government policy is of prime importance in the rational expectations model. Since individuals believe in the commitment of the government, they will quickly adjust their inflationary expectations downward. Now, as the expectations are reduced, the inflation will be reducing without any increase in unemployment or the reduction in output. As individuals adjust their expectations very quickly, the short-run Phillips curve would shift downward and the economy would reach low inflation without the cost of temporarily high unemployment and the low output. Thus, in the rational expectations model, cost of disinflation is much lower and the sacrifice ratio is much less in value. In this model, we find that even when the government is not at all taking up any policy, the people will be adjusting their inflationary expectation on the basis of the announcements that are made by the government. However, the announcement must be credible enough for the entire process to gain momentum. The rational expectations approach, however, remains controversial. The credibility of a policy to reduce inflation is one important determinant of how costly the policy will be. It is very difficult to find out whether the individuals will view the announcement of a new policy as credible. Therefore, the central role of expectations would make predicting the results of alternative policies more difficult. Analysis of inflation, output and unemployment is based on the concept of natural rate of unemployment as was introduced by Milton Friedman. However, after the introduction of the concepts, there were certain studies that discussed about the determinants of this natural rate of unemployment, and they discussed about what should be the optimum value of this natural rate of unemployment across the different regions. The issues are important because, as pointed out by Friedman, in the short run there is a trade-off between inflation and unemployment, and in the long run, if the government wants to reduce the level of unemployment below the natural rate of unemployment, then there will be ever accelerating inflation. Therefore, it is important to find out by how much unemployment may be safely reduced. The issue gained significance as in the late 1990s, the unemployment rate fell to a 30-year low in the United States. In the European nations, however, the unemployment rate has increased over time. Now, what explains these changes in the natural rate of unemployment? As pointed out by Friedman, the natural rate of unemployment is determined in the labor market, and the natural rate in real world will be determined by the structural characteristics of the labor and the commodity markets. Such structural characteristics include stochastic variability in demand and supplies, the market imperfections, cost of gathering information about job vacancies, labor availabilities, cost of mobility, and the other factors. Now, since the natural rate of unemployment depends on the structural factors, then there is no need to assume that this rate will remain constant over time. Rather, it will be time varying. Of course, the changes will be gradual rather than abrupt, but there is no reason to believe the natural rate of unemployment to be time independent. As mentioned earlier, this is evident from the real-life data also. In Europe as well as in the United States, the unemployment rate trended upward in 1970s and in 1980s. The trend continued in the European market. However, in 1990s, there has been a significant decline in the US unemployment rate. Now, what explains such changing nature of natural rate of unemployment in the two countries? Some studies have pointed out that one possible factor may be the rigidity in the European labor market, particularly among the nations that are members of the European Union. The labor market regulations in the European Union countries are significantly strong. So there are certain restrictions on plant closings and provisions for mandatory severance pay. All these discourage the firms from expanding the employment. The trade unions are significantly strong in the European Union countries. Moreover, the government has generous unemployment compensation and other social benefit and other schemes that make unemployment to be less painful. Other studies have pointed toward the growing competition from the lower-rich countries, particularly from the rapidly growing Asian economies. Now, given the existing rigidity of the labor markets and the social benefit schemes in the European market, the growing competition is actually increasing the European unemployment rather than pulling the European real wages down. The concept of hysteresis is often used by some economists to challenge the natural rate of hypothesis. This concept of hysteresis is often used to explain the increase in European unemployment over time. Hysteresis refers to the phenomenon that history has a long-lasting influence on the natural rate, so that recession can have permanent effect on the economy. So there is long memory in the system. If unemployment is high in some particular period, then that will be carried over to the other future periods also, making unemployment higher in the future periods. So this is true for any other variable in the system. So if there is a shock in the system and if the value of a variable is changed, then even after a shock is over, the variable will not come back to its initial value. The economists who are in favor of using the concept of hysteresis pointed out that the high unemployment in the recession of 1970s and 1980s had long-lasting impact on unemployment in the later years also. Now this hysteresis concept challenges the natural rate of hypothesis by suggesting that the aggregate demand may affect output and employment even in the long run. As we have discussed earlier, the natural rate hypothesis is basically an extension of the classical ideas that emphasized on the real sector, financial sector dichotomy. Presence of hysteresis, however, points out that aggregate demand will have significant impact on the economy even in the longer run. Now we can find out different ways in which a recession can have permanent effect on the economy. While remaining unemployed, the workers might lose their skills and efficiency. This long spell of unemployment might increase lethargy and might diminish the workers' ability to find out a job even after the recession ends. A person's attitude towards work might change, the process of job search may be hindered, and frictional unemployment might also increase. The power of the trade union might be diminishing if the recession continues for a quite long period of time. The bargaining power of the workers will be reducing. In fact, some of the insiders in the wage setting process might become outsider if the recession continues for quite a long period of time. The concept of hysteresis, however, remains controversial. The rise in European unemployment, which started in the early 1980s, coincided with a disinflation period, but it continued after the inflation stabilization. The increase in unemployment tended to be larger for the countries that experienced greatest reduction in inflation, for example, Ireland, Italy and Spain. There are, however, other complexity in the system. The relationship between the labor market rigidity and unemployment is not also very clear. In the continental European countries, the flexibility in the labor market seems to have made it easier to shed workers, particularly during the downturn. Denmark, which had earlier instituted labor market reforms that significantly lowered unemployment by 2005, came through the recession with relatively little cyclical unemployment. Spain and Ireland, hit by massive housing busts and banking problems, saw increase in unemployment. At present, for most of the countries, high unemployment is the most significant macroeconomic problem. These apparent large variations of the natural rate of unemployment in the European countries have casted some doubt to the usefulness of the concept of using the natural rate of unemployment in developing or in designing the macroeconomic policy. Robert Solow argued that the natural rate of unemployment is not natural at all. It fluctuates tremendously under the influence of many different factors, some of which are indeed unspecified. For example, past unemployment rates, the recession. The system indeed has a memory that jeopardizes the use of the concept of natural rate of unemployment in designing suitable macroeconomic policy. This criticism, however, does not reduce the importance of the natural rate hypothesis. To quote Joseph Stiglitz, the natural rate provides a useful framework for thinking about policy questions, even if there is considerable uncertainty about its exact magnitude.